Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. LinkedIn Live, today on the topic of the good, the bad, and the ugly of co-facilitation. Flor, Cate, and I are excited to share our experiences. yes, and exchange. And you in the audience, we cannot see you, but we can see your comments. So please feel free to add your comments below so that we can answer your questions and reply to your comments as they drop in. Wonderful. One reason why we selected this topic was, hi Sharon, good to see you. One reason why we chose that topic was that we completed the leadership through facilitation course a few weeks ago. And one big topic that we kind of addressed, but not to the full extent, was co-facilitation. And we have co-facilitated, co-designed this course with 6 of us. Lots of learnings. So we are ready to dive in. Hi, Sharon. Hi, Guy. Hello, Molly. Good to see you. Now you can sneak behind the scenes of what had happened during the course. Flo and Cate, would you like to start, introduce yourself, and maybe share what is the good of co-facilitation? And where does the bad and the ugly come in?
I can kick us off. So my name is Flor. I'm originally from Netherlands, based in Portugal. One of this famous 6 by now, who has been running this course. And yes, I think we spent almost more time talking about our dynamics and our co-facilitation and our styles, both in designing and facilitation, than sometimes on the content. So it's such an important element of when you're working together. The good for me, and I'm definitely someone who loves working with co-facilitators more than by myself. It feels like you just have somebody next to you who knows exactly what you're going through, who's the only person in the room when you're leading a group who knows that, because the group is either, they need to be their participants, they need to be your clients, and they need to have a certain distance, and you want them to be fully present in their process. But having someone who knows exactly what you're going through, who knows exactly how that feels, I think that's for me the most important, that you can lean on somebody, check in, spar. Am I crazy? Do you see the same? I think that for me is the absolute best of co-facilitation. Yeah.
And hi, I'm Cate, and I have had the pleasure of co-facilitating and co-designing with these 2 and many other incredibly talented facilitators over the last couple of years. And I'm originally from the US. I just got back from there, actually, from the IAF conference, speaking of great co-facilitators, with Shamir Joseph, one of our other collaborators. And for me, I've said it many times. My standard opinion about co-facilitation is that if I never facilitated alone again, that would be fine. I love it. And even in challenging circumstances, I feel as though my growth is always, selfishly speaking, my growth is always greater when I'm collaborating. And also the satisfaction of knowing that I'm contributing to a group effort is something that's really valuable for me. So selfishly, those are my reasons for loving co-facilitations. Also, I just feel as though oftentimes the product and the outcomes for participants are even better. So that, for those reasons and more, I love co-facilitating in every aspect, and from design to delivery to follow up, and everything in between.
Thank you. And Garrett, before we come to defining what a co-facilitator actually is, we'll get to that. And thank you for asking the question. For me, and maybe I have to say that given the brand name NeverDoneBefore, what I love most about co-facilitation is actually the additional twist, the merging 2 brains two fields of experience, two perspectives together. So almost by definition, something new and never done before will come out of that. And I really enjoyed this kind of creative sparring process in the design, and having someone, as you also mentioned, to spar. So in my brain and in my world, it makes total absolute sense what I'm creating for a group. And then suddenly this other person comes and dares to question everything I've done. Slight bridge into the bad and the ugly of co-facilitation. Hi, Said. And before we dive into the bits, Garrett asked, do you consider solution designers and knowledge workers as co-facilitators?
I think it's a good question to actually define what it is. And because like I said before, when I feel that I can share the load with someone in a process, and I can have that with solution designers. I can have that with knowledge. I can have that with somebody who is with me in a part of the process, I think. And even tech hosts online has become very common, right? That especially in our online facilitations, we have someone with us who's running the breakout rooms, or who's doing the music and all the technical stuff for us. I do feel, in my maybe narrow view of this, that a co-facilitator is really somebody who does the actual delivery of the process. So it doesn't mean that these people are not great for that same sort of feeling of support, but the actual, maybe the responsibility or the risk level would be highest with somebody who's actually in the ball pit with you, right? Like somebody who steps. That would be my sort of definition of a co-facilitator.
Yeah, I agree. And Paul also sheds light on it from a different direction, coming from the teaching. So having two teachers in the classroom who are equally responsible. So I agree.
Yeah, one of my more fun and challenging experiences in the last year has been co-teaching, co-training, I would say. Mm-hmm. So for an adult group, but yeah, then sharing the content, designing that content, delivering the content, and then being able to give the individualized attention, but then also leveraging in the room the support for our individual styles of support, right, in the classroom was also extremely beneficial for the students.
Yeah. And maybe this comment combined with what Molly put in the chat, if we have a tendency to like to control, and I actually wonder whether it is something that many facilitators actually share. We like to control however strict or wide we want to define control, but we're designing a structure, process for the group to go through. And usually we put a lot of effort in that. And then how do we deal with it when we have two different flows or two different attitudes? One maybe who loves to follow the flow, the other one who loves to go off script and rather improvise. What are your stories or experiences with?
That's where we get to the ugly, right? That's where we get to the gossip.
Is this already the ugly, or is it what?
No,
what differentiates the bad from the ugly?
I think it's really, for me, really important. My personal relationship with a co-facilitator comes into play here. I think that's one element of what, as well, because if you know the person on like either you've worked with them before, and they don't have to be best friends, but if you've worked with them before and you know how they improvise or how they go off script, sounds a bit controversial, but I mean, like that you can trust that if they go off script or if they go their own flow, that they will still be able to land things. That's, of course, probably the beauty of being complementary. And you can already see my style in this, right? I'm definitely not the one who would go full off script. So I think time management is something that can be tricky, especially if you've divided slots and you say you have 1.5 hours for your piece. However you do your part, that's up to you. And then you get it back half an hour too late. I think that's something that has definitely come up. So then it's not really off script. It's really just sort of out of the and then you have to make up for that time. So I think that's definitely one of those where the off script wouldn't support in that sense.
No, I think so. In my experience, I think it's also good to talk about Yeah, I mean, we need to talk about, I think, our best practices for what we define up front. So that's definitely been a learning, even between, Miriam and I, in terms of what sometimes you don't know what is meaningful for you in a session until you're working with somebody who does something a different way. And so what I have found is super important is moderating my own response in those situations, because the most important thing is that you do not disturb anything for the participants. So somebody mentioned, sometimes things get iffy, and what do you do? Who do you defer to in that situation? Thankfully, I have not come to the point yet in a co-facilitation where I felt the need to bring in someone to mediate between a co-facilitator and I. And partially that's because it is my policy to, when it gets to the point when there might be a disturbance between the facilitators, I yes and.
Yeah.
And in the next possible moment that I can create a moment of connection with the other facilitator, then check in a way that's subtle enough that it doesn't disturb the participants, because almost always you can recover. Just get on the same page and recover.
Totally. And it reminds me actually of the improv theater principles. Mm-hmm. And that's why improv theater, or at least the two-person scenes, are perfect practice for co-facilitation, where one of the principles is radically yes and which doesn't mean that sometimes you can add a different perspective, or you can even say no, but you yes and the approach and the other person. And the other principle is make your partner look good. Always.
That's so true. Yeah.
Because there's nothing weirder than having two co-facilitators argue with each other in front of the participants.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with you, Cate, that discussing it up front and having a kind of process of who is in charge of what and how do we deal with these moments when we do need more time. And personally, for me, it's when I'm in charge of a block or a part of a session. I love when my co-facilitator comes in and adds other perspectives, another layer of content, like, oh yeah, you do it like this. Here's another way to look at that. Or how interesting, I'm doing it differently, just to showcase that there is not one truth in facilitation. We can do it differently and it can be equally good. What I less appreciate or don't appreciate if the co-facilitator comes in to change my process.
Yeah, obviously, yes. Yeah.
And then, let's make it shorter, or let's skip this part. Let's do something else. And then suddenly it becomes a decision, although I have thought about that. And if it's my part, I would like to own the process and be more open with the content.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can you give me an example? So your second example is very clear to me, like hands off my process. But and the first part to me, can you give me an example of what works for you? So I wasn't clear if you were saying that in a session, your co-facilitator is like, oh, it's interesting that we're doing it this way. Or were you talking about like in the design process? Like, tell me more.
Even in the session.
Yeah.
So to add another layer and a different perspective in a way that obviously doesn't nullify or make me wrong, because we yes and each other. And I think, and it might also depend on the content or what you facilitate. I often facilitate facilitation training, so it's very meta. Or brainstorming strategy sessions and these kind of things. So if the co-facilitator comes in to add another layer, another way to look at it, I find this is very helpful for the group. And maybe that's where I would land, as long as it benefits and creates value to the group.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's almost the co-facilitator then comes in almost at a sort of a experienced participant level, right? Where they say, I'd also like to share something. And I think that's definitely a contribution. And I used to have this really strict rule with my co-facilitators that we wouldn't come into each other's process. So we wouldn't, because I agree with you, somebody coming in to either take over your process or question you in front of the participants, or even re-explain something that you've just explained because in their view you haven't explained it properly. I think that can be really disruptive. But we had the opposite side of that rule, was that the one who was facilitating would always check at the end saying, or at several moments saying, do you have something to add? Like calling the person in when it was convenient in your process. And it sounds a bit controlling. And I think now with a bit more experience, I would feel more comfortable if somebody would suddenly come in. But in the beginning, this was very important for me that I would have that control, and I could say, Miriam, do you have something to add here? Because this would be a great space, for that layer on top. And definitely for me, the line is drawn at re-explain, like I said, like re-explaining. If you give a prompt and then your co-facilitator comes in, so just to be clear, it completely undermines your process. And of course, if you feel that your co-facilitator hasn't explained a prompt properly, give that feedback when the participants are out and say, hey, next time could be good. Please feedback constantly. But like Cate said before, in front of the group, I think it's really good to keep that sort of to a minimum for the good of the group as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Where would you draw the line between the bad and the ugly? Just to add a little bit of spice to the sauce. And then we come to Sharon's question.
For me, the bad is internal. The bad is something in the way that I feel, whether that's frustrated or maybe disrespected. The ugly is when it gets externalized, and I feel as though it impacts the participant experience. So you can make the argument that if it's impacting me negatively, of course, as part of the group, it's impacting the group. But I would like to think I can minimize that. But yeah, I think it gets ugly when there's clear misalignment.
Love the distinction.
Yes, and maybe when it flows into the participants' process, probably that for me would make it very ugly as well. I've had and now we said we were not going to do that, right? Like dragging people's names. But I've had a lot of work with my husband, my partner, who's also my business partner, and a lot of times my co-facilitator. And that has been super challenging in terms of bringing personal relationship. And that's not just like we have a good, it's deep personal relationships into co-facilitation. So I think, and just to make the link to something learningful in that, if you're bringing other elements of your relationship into a co-facilitation, I think that can get pretty ugly, because we would sometimes facilitate together, and I've discussed this with him as well, so it's okay to share it here. We would still be we would still be annoyed about who did or didn't do the dishes in the morning, and then we'd facilitate together. So you're already on edge about like, oh, you're always, you do. So what we had, it wouldn't necessarily go over to the participant. I think sometimes they would even find our dynamics interesting to see. We just couldn't find a good platform to give that continuous feedback. And I think that's something that's for me when it turns really from bad to ugly, is that because that continuous feedback is really important in a non-violent communication way. So you can say, let's work on this, but that you just can't find each other anymore because you're already so annoyed with each other about something else. And I think that's something fundamental for me, even more than your relationship with the participants. That professional platform to support each other is really important. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to build on that, but Miriam, do you want to give your distinction first?
It's really similar. I love the distinction, and for me, it's then this self-awareness piece that comes in, because it's the bad things are the itches where we are confronted with the limitations of our own knowledge, maybe our biases, ego.
Yes.
No. I don't know what you're talking about.
I think ego is a very big part. I think as facilitators, we leave our ego at the door once we step into the room, but there is so much in front of the door. And I think all of that. And then, the ugly is when we cannot control it anymore. And therefore, I think we do need these systems and how to how to debrief and how to have feedback with our co-facilitators, which is very challenging.
Yeah. So I'm going to build on all that, and also something Rafa just said. Hi, Rafa. About psychological safety. So I've been extremely fortunate to have longer relationships with most of my co-facilitators, right? So at least, and during the design process, it's been definitely a big learning about just how explicit I need to be about not just like boundaries, but Flora, to your point, like how I am feeling in any given moment about a thing. And most recently on a session that I was working on that was a live session, my nerves were like live, and I mean like in real life, in person session, which I think it's worth talking about, like, the pros and cons of co-facilitating online and offline. But at any rate, I just had to say it. I was like, I am so nervous right now, and these are the things that you need to know that I'm feeling, because if I walk in there with this energy, not having expressed it to you, it will get ugly. Because that's when my control tendencies come out, right? So yeah, it takes so much trust and also psychological safety to know that my thoughts and my feelings will be, heard and respected. So I'm very fortunate to have collaborators like that.
We had a question by Sharon about rehearsals. So when we're first time on stage or in the space with a new co-facilitator, do we do this untested? I must admit that I'm guilty. I've done it untested, unrehearsed, and then it depends on how well we know the person independently. So I wouldn't co-facilitate with someone that I don't know and I haven't worked before. Then I would, and that's maybe one of the reasons why I only collaborate with NeverDoneBefore members, because we have this entire community and ecosystem to constantly rehearse with each other. How about you?
Yeah, I wish I had the luxury to always have that. I think I'm thinking of moments where I was really thrown in the deep end. Recently, 5-day in-person conference, huge. We were hired late in the process, about 3 or 4 weeks before the person, which is ridiculously late. And the co-facilitator, I never met her even before that. So we met the day before. We had been online a couple of times before, and we had to run a 5-day conference for 120 people together. That's for me the most extreme that I've done in terms of co-facilitation and not knowing someone. We had to go to a level of trust together at such a high speed, but at the same time, I noticed, because we were both really conscious of that, we were careful going, and we had those improv principles really well done, because we knew we needed to dance better, and it flowed really well. And we told people later that we had never even met before. People were surprised. So if you don't have the luxury, I think of a rehearsal, of working with each other either before or having that run through, you come in differently, right? You come in more carefully. I don't think I would do run throughs in front of a group. I think that was part of Sharon's question, right? But I do, and I think we've done that, maybe Cate as well. Like we would go through a script and say, okay, now to you. What's the transition here? How do you pass to me? So yeah, I think we've done that. If we have that luxury, for sure. But I agree with you, Miriam. I also prefer if I already know the cues, if I already know the styles. It does really help as well.
Yeah. And I mean, you can get creative with it too. So like Miriam said, we all collaborate on the within the NeverDoneBefore community, but even if you don't have that, so Flora and I knew that we were going to be co-facilitating the practice module for the leadership course, and so we didn't literally do that session for the community, but we did do a shorter session on the topic as part of the festival. So at least that way we got to practice for an hour co-facilitating together and working out our energy that way. So yeah, I mean, I think if you get creative with it, you can exercise the muscles, if not the entire flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this question by Michael beautifully comes to that. Recruiting sounds like a clear process, but how do you select with whom to co-facilitate?
Why don't you share first, Miriam? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
And there are different sides in me. So the rational side thinks, oh, it's beneficial to have someone who approaches facilitation who has a different style than me, so that we can beautifully complement each other. And I know that this is very challenging. And I think what I intuitively do is I look for, is this person inspiring me? So do I enjoy being in their session? Do I feel safe in their sessions? Do they have this level of self-awareness so that we can have these difficult conversations or feedback and land at a higher level than we started when we go through conflict and through, misalignment or discussions? And I think it depends on what kind of session I'm looking for a co-facilitator.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would, depending on the client, whether it's a client or it's an open workshop for a larger online community or it's a course, I would select different facilitators. So for a course, definitely with complementary skills and a complementary way of facilitating. So I'm doing now the course with Michelle Howard on the foundations of facilitation. And we are very different in the way we facilitate, and I think it's interesting for the participants, and for clients it might be different. How about you?
No, I like that, and I think exactly the purpose is really important. What are you facilitating together? What are you going to be facilitating together? And I think sometimes when we think about style, we think only about, somebody who's very organized and somebody who's more improv, but there's so many different angles to style, right? So I love people, for instance, I have quite a high energy and I'm jumping around most of the time, especially in person. I love facilitating with people who are calmer. So that's a complementary style on a different level, right? Because they will help me to manage the energy of the group, because I just have a hard time to lead like a guided meditation or to, you can imagine me, and then just to calm people down. So this, one of my favorite co-facilitators was a very calm guy who would come in and he would just take through processes that needed deeper reflection. And then I could come in with higher energy again. So for me, style has so many different angles that you can find that complementarity in different places, I think. Another thing, and I think we don't address that enough sometimes, is also representation. So I think in co-facilitation, we also really need to work with, so one of the projects I was asked for instance, was a gathering of African countries. I really don't mind facilitating that, but I told them my co-facilitator needs to be from an African country. I can't come in with 2 European facilitators. That's not possible. So things like that, I think we underestimate that enough sometimes, like what participants also connect to when you're facilitating a group of women, when you're talking about diversity. It's really important. So I do recruit for that as well. I think that's an important element for me.
No. Thanks for saying that, Flora. In every aspect, I think about diversity, and that could be representation, so visible diversity, right? Also, any diversity of identity is really valuable for the group, valuable for the design process, valuable for our approaches, and also our mutual growth. So yeah, absolutely. I work with an organization called EQUA here in Berlin. On occasion, we do DEI trainings for various kinds of organizations and also for social justice groups. And we actually have a rule that 2 white presenting people will not facilitate a DEI training at the same time. And we have a diverse enough pool of people that is seldom a problem. That means I step back often on a gig to give priority to a BIPOC person. And that's fine for me and right and part of our agreement. So,
yep.
And otherwise, I mean, I think you all nailed it. I'm not going to waste any more ear.
We have another juicy question.
Yes, I think I know which one.
Carrots? Or is there another juicy one? There's
How
time
about
management.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
How do you handle impromptu co-facilitation? I would have said the air quotes differently. The impromptu and the co-facilitation, my client sponsors.
It's very impromptu and it's not, talk about ugly. No, sorry.
Thank you for asking the question, Garrett.
Yeah.
It's a juicy one, definitely. Oh my. No, and this actually, I think this is such an important part. We tend to really shy away from the dangerous words of educating clients, right? But we do, as facilitators, process leaders, we have to educate our clients on what we do, how we do it, and their role in it. I had wonderful clients, like really amazing clients who came with constructive feedback, who were facilitators themselves, who wanted to learn from us. This is wonderful. I'm not saying butt out completely. Please be part of it, know what we're doing. We've also had clients where we would have a WhatsApp group for logistics, and suddenly in that WhatsApp group, we would get, like, while we were facilitating, tips or tricks or people whispering in your ear. These are kind of boundaries that you have to set from the get-go. Like, this needs to be really clear when we're facilitating. The same rule you would have with your actual co-facilitator. Don't start whispering in my ear. Don't send me WhatsApp messages halfway to change something. So there has to be alignment and limits. I found that if you offer constructive space for your client to give feedback and they know when they can give you feedback, they will feel calmer during the process itself, because they know that during lunch or at the end of the day or in other moments they can come in to give you feedback. But for sure, limits, boundaries, fundamental here.
What about you, Miriam?
100%. And I think the conversation beforehand to really make clear, especially when it's when the client is a facilitator, if they're good facilitators, like in your case, Flor, it's beautiful, because then they might really have something to add, an idea. And then I think even in the build up to the workshop or the project, it might be different. I think the worst case is when they think they can facilitate, and then they micromanage from the sidelines. And there, I find it very important in the beginning to also say, okay, you hired an external facilitator because you're aware that you cannot participate and facilitate at the same time. And then I wonder whether often when they start to micromanage from the sidelines, it's actually because there's so much under pressure. So they have high stakes in the outcomes. And then how can we calm them down and take them away from the sidelines to you sit down and relax. I take care of that.
Yeah. And I mean, and approach it from generosity, right? So we just said, it's our job to make our partners look good. And it is most certainly our job to make our sponsors look good.
Absolutely.
So, so I think the delicate diplomacy of somebody who is, acting out their nervousness, in acknowledging it, just like you would with any challenging participant, right? Like acknowledging it, and then also drawing a very gentle boundary. And so when I've encountered this in the past, if somebody pipes up, said, well, Cate, I mean, I think it would have been better had we started the session like this, which happened to me a couple of weeks ago. Typically I'll just say, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I appreciate your investment in the process. And, I invite you to participate with everyone and go along with this and this experiment. And then in a couple of, in a little bit, we're going to have a break and I'll check in with you.
Absolutely. I do think it's fundamental, like what you said as well, Cate, is that we do honor the sponsor, the client as well, right? So it's not about, it is also about giving them that space and giving them that acknowledgement. And I also don't think we should leave no space for them coming in and them giving feedback. And because like any good co-facilitator, anybody who's supporting your process, you grow from it. So assuming that you know everything or do everything by yourself without any input also doesn't work. So for me, it's really about that, the good dosage and the micromanaging from a co-facilitator or from a client always comes exactly like you said, from this place of fear or anxiety. Work with it, talk about it, organize it, do a good job. That's also another one. Then they tend to also stop at some point. And then I think that acknowledgement is important as well, to listen to the input.
And to build on that and what Cate said, I think approaching them as if we approach participants who have a lot to contribute, and for others somehow seem to take too much space, and acknowledging their knowledge, thanking them for contributing. And I think especially with the client is, yes, ending, and at the same time suggesting, okay, shall we discuss this in the next break? Or to kind of bring it off the stage, which could then be very difficult, because at some point I think there's the micromanaging from the sidelines, or there's a stepping up and suggesting a different process. So it has happened to me where a client would then say, I think we should do something different. I don't think that this is the next step we should do. So why don't we do it differently? And there it puts the facilitator in a very difficult situation, because somehow we either have to give up on our process and then also lose the trust of the group. And I think if the group stops trusting us to guide them through the process, this can compromise the outcomes of the workshop, or we have to dismiss the client. And then they might fire back because they're losing face in front of their people.
This can happen with between actual co-facilitators as well, though. I don't know if any of you have had that before, that your co-facilitator does something like that, just during the process say, the way we designed the next part, I think we should completely change it. And there's just no way to change their mind. And you are saying, but trust or stick with it. I don't know if any of you've had that before, but it can happen between your partner as well. So.
Yeah, and the best you can do is hold your breath and smile. And speak to them at the next opportunity.
There's so much going on in the chat.
It is, right? Yes. It's wonderful.
And Flor, you pointed out another question that was interesting to discuss. I was wondering whether it is the timing.
About management and time management. Yeah. Yes, it's already quite some time.
How do you deal with time management amongst co-facilitators?
How do we do it now? Again, I think there's a lot of ways to learn from it. I think this is something you need to discuss beforehand. Time management. Unfortunately, I think early on in becoming a facilitator, I learned that time management and doing math around time is just so crucial. It's not the sexy part of facilitation, but it's such a fundamental part. In order to get the stuff done that you need done, you just need, time management, and you approach that differently. And again, so I've had co-facilitators who would be more relaxed about time management, and then they would go so much over the time with their blocks or their assigned blocks that I would have to cut in my parts. And I think that's just not cool. And unless you mutually agree, saying, well, you're getting a lot of really good response to your content or to your process, let's extend it. And then you mutually agree on that. I can cut some parts from that, but having something like the group hand it to you, and you have to finish it with 40 minutes less. I think that's really, in that sense, you don't want to get to that place. I would always discuss it beforehand, like how do you deal with time? Is it okay if we go 10 minutes over? And to be open also to look at the room like you always do if you were facilitating by yourself and say, hey, maybe we need to cut some extra time here. And to be generous enough to give that then to your co-facilitator as well, if you see that, even though it cuts into your own space. So if you were alone, you would always adapt. So I think together you can, but it definitely needs to be mutual agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think therefore, when working with a co-facilitator, it's even more important to discuss the overall and to be aligned on the overall purpose and the purpose of each and every activity. Because if we know why we're doing this activity and what we aim to achieve with it, we can then be aligned. Okay, are we still achieving it in this time, in this sequence, and with this group?
Yeah.
So, and I think, this is something that just needs much more time to align with a co-facilitator, and then it becomes easier.
Yeah. And one more layer to that is also just a design. Like you said, if you're clear on your purpose, then if I were designing my own, I would always have a plan B or maybe a plan C.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing, right? Just a quick acknowledgement. It's like, okay, now we're going to plan B for the later exercise. No stress. So, yeah. I think so I'm just going to call something out real quick, which is that I feel like the three of us have similar approaches to time management and so I just want to just acknowledge that for the crowd.
Yes.
That in terms of diversity, at least Flor and I for sure, in terms of diversity of opinion on time management, I don't really feel like it's represented here. So just so everybody knows.
Talk about representation. Although I still have to meet the first facilitator who will tell me it's not important at all. I think there will be facilitators who can say, let's be flexible, but and I agree with that. But I think, but okay, maybe I'm also biased, but it's a good point to point out, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think time is one of the things. It's like, I was almost about to say it's like dirty socks. You're in charge of your own time and you can be flexible with it.
Exactly.
As long as it doesn't disturb anyone else. But if you're sharing space and you leave your dirty socks everywhere, maybe it's not so cool. Maybe it's a very bad example.
No, it's good.
But I think as soon as we co-facilitate with one other person, it's just a matter of respect, I think, also to be more clear.
Yeah.
And respectful of time. And I think we all know whether it's easy for us to stick to time or not. And apparently this has genetic reasons that some of us can and others cannot. And then it comes back to the self-awareness piece.
Yep.
Let's be honest about it. And usually, so I always introduce myself as a German facilitator. And I will be the one who checks the time and reminds everyone. And then generally my co-facilitator asks me, Miriam, do we have time for another question? Do we have time for another detour? Which then becomes kind of a joke. So they're not really asking me for permission, but it's kind of this quick interplay, role play, where we can have the conversation in front of the group. Because we have set the stage in a way that I'm the timekeeper, using a bit of humor.
Yeah. And again, like it's all around purpose. And that's, I think, all these things where we differentiate in styles, in approach, in the way you make the prompts, in the way you manage time, as long as it serves the purpose. For instance, like if somebody goes over time just because they are continuously talking themselves, that's one thing. If they're going over time because the group is super engaged and there's more questions bubbling up, these are two completely different scenarios. So again, like you've both said it in different moments as well. Why, what's happening, connecting to that purpose, being aligned on that, then so much becomes possible as well. I'd like to come back to one question that I think, Miriam, you brought it up, or maybe it was from the chat as well. If there's a difference between online and offline co-facilitation, because we're celebrating 4 years of full-time online facilitation. Some people already did beforehand, of course, going back more to on-site. But I'm wondering if you feel that there's a big difference between the on-site and the offline co-facilitation.
I think online it's easier to send the participants off to their breakout rooms and then have this time to really rediscuss. Don't forget to pause the recording.
That's the golden tip for today. If you take nothing away from this live, if that's it.
Exactly. So this makes it a bit easier. On the other hand, on site, it's easier, I think, to just exchange a quick glance. And there are some people, and I think if you have co-facilitated a lot, you exchange a glance and then you know exactly what you mean and whether you want to continue or stop. So, yeah. Cate, what's your...
Similar. It's interesting because so much of it is interesting, but one thing that I've noticed, the more facilitators that I got to meet online, I meet them offline, is that our energies are so different IRL. And so I love in person in that we get to take full advantage of our presence, right? And I do think and then that gets exponentially impactful in person. Like you were saying, Flora, everybody's got their complementary energies. That said, logistically, it's so much easier online. So much easier to send a little note. So much easier, just like you said, like in the 5 minutes that people are in a breakout room, so easy to align, right? Without disturbing anybody. So yeah, I think for me personally, I find it less stressful.
That's interesting because I actually find those spot of the moment notes more stressful sometimes because in a person you might not have that space to send a message or whisper in somebody's ear because that person's in front and you'll be and then I think it's gotten a bit better now, but in the beginning especially we would use these private chats and you'd just be like, you're in the middle of a sentence and somebody says, you only have 5 minutes left, or, hey, maybe don't forget to share. And you'll be like, what? So I get more sort of taken aback by the constant message. So I find that part actually, or at least that element a little bit more stressful. For the rest, I do agree with you. There is a sort of a quicker way. I do like the body language that you're referring to, Miriam, that you have, because I don't know why we keep coming back to time management, but if I have a co-facilitator who's going over time and I'll be sitting on the side, I just stand up and I say, and that's sort of my cue to say, that's it. And online, I don't have that body language, you don't. So there's a lot, it's just like, finito, you're like, unmute yourself. And then I find that sort of stressful sending a message like, hey, time check, so I think there's something there as well that, there's good and bad in both. Absolutely. Definitely different.
And before coming to Molly's question, so the example you gave, the constant messages, like you have only 5 minutes left and don't forget to point out. For me, this is part of the micromanagement. Yeah. And for me, that's a big no. Mm-hmm. So if my co-facilitator starts to bombard me with side coaching, because this is not only, it's taking away my attention from the group, and is not trusting my process, my presence, and me doing the things, this will definitely lead to a serious conversation afterwards. Because I think it's not okay.
No.
Yeah.
I want to clarify for everybody who's listening who might consider me as a co-facilitator. I don't do that, and I don't advocate for that. I'm just saying. It's handy.
And I can testify
and
it is
handy. No, and it is handy. Absolutely. No, we can all vouch for Cate for each other. So, no, definitely. I think as well.
Co-facilitating with all of them, and you don't have time for our leadership through facilitation course and our co-facilitation anymore, then it's a no from my side.
Definitely.
Another question about timing, and then I think it's almost time to wrap it up. Molly asked for how to deal with this situation, and we all know there's never enough time, and we have this ongoing discussion, and it's juicy, and I know these situations. So from a co-facilitation point of view, where there's one co-facilitator who really comes more from the coaching side. Oh, tell me more about that. Oh, what do you think? How did that feel? So really kind of goes into coaching mode with one participant who started sharing. And I sit there, we don't have time. This for me is a real co-facilitation thing that I also learned to discuss beforehand. How's it for you?
How is that, Cate? Go ahead.
I had this happen recently. Actually, it was a different thing. Miriam, actually, I think I probably tend to be the person you're describing. So if that ever happens, just be like, Cate, shut up.
In front of everyone.
So, yes, for sure. No, but actually I had the opposite happen where it was not my part of the process, and a participant was taking up a ton of space, and I really just had to suck it up and bite my tongue. And it was so hard. Yeah, so that doesn't necessarily answer Molly's question, but honestly, yeah, if it's not my part of the process, I zip it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's more about time. It can happen when you're facilitating by yourself, right? So it doesn't necessarily. And I think what's the beauty here is that as a co-facilitator, if you see this happening to your partner, you can be the bad cop and say, it's time, we need to round this up, giving the good cop in that sense, or the person who is creating that rapport in the moment with the group, the space to not have to cut off people if you see that, for instance, is a challenging moment. Or I think you can really play with that a lot, like these energies, and share and just say, I'm the one who's going to land this, so give it to me. And then you don't have to say, that's enough. So, but I think, yeah, this question, it goes also beyond, I think, co-facilitation in general.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really beautiful. I just wanted to add that before we also talk a bit more about the course, because I know that's also important. I find that I really have to challenge myself to just stay curious about what can happen if I sometimes let my co-facilitator do their thing, instead of, it's really right, this improv principle, like what can happen. And then sometimes instead of thinking, oh no, that's not good, oh, the car wreck, and then I think, you know what, maybe this is going to be awesome. maybe this is going to surprise me immensely. So I think that's also one of the things with these kind of processes. It's just wonderful to say, let's see what happens. That's also really nice to be able to say that.
Thanks for saying that. And also I say it out loud. So if my co-facilitator suggests something, and even, on the inside, I am this person who's like, the process, I'll just say like, yeah, I trust you.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I do.
And I think that in German I would say, der Ton spielt die Musik. It's the tone that makes the music. And there are very charming ways of telling a co-facilitator to speed up or to do something different. And I think the group can sense the difference, whether it's this passive aggressive, oh my God, you never finish on time. And it's, oh, time is running. Maybe the German again. And then I think if we can spark in the humor and allocate the roles from the beginning to give each other permission, I think then it's beautiful. And then it's also beautiful if someone says, you know what, I just had an idea. What do you think about that? I think that's an excellent idea. Or and then include the group maybe a bit. This can be
super good. Yeah,
can be super good. It's a thin line though.
Yeah. And definitely the next live about time management, facilitation, time management. We just got into it, and we need to add, we'll diversify a bit. We'll get some chaos pilots, like people who make a mess.
And I have to speak to Saeed, the $1 billion idea, a service like Tinder, but for matching co-facilitators. And we have Reese and Etrit at the NeverDoneBefore community, who always regularly host our co-facilitator speed dating. So yes, there's definitely a market for that. So what does it all has to do with, no, let me frame it differently. Audience, if you want more of that, join us. Because we are 3 out of 5. So we left the man at home. They're cleaning the socks at the moment. It's me, a running gag. We are 3 out of 5 of the faculty of the Leadership Through Facilitation course. It's live, meaning it's not pre-recorded. You don't have to watch videos by yourself. No, you'll be in a cohort, in a small group. There will always be 2 of us. And what are we doing there? Flo, Cate.
I was just trying to find the link, so maybe Cate can go first, and then I'll post the link in the chat.
Miriam, what do you mean? What are we doing there besides showcasing
leadership through facilitation?
Yes.
And the idea is to shed light on the leadership side of facilitation. So when is it that we step up into these leadership positions where we are, how do we show up in our presence as a leader? Because as facilitators, we are often said that we're leading from the back of the room. We make ourselves invisible. And with all of that said, it's still a lot of responsibility that we're taking.
Yeah. And often, I mean, we're called in as facilitators to, thanks, Molly. Molly from our inaugural cohort. So yes, so as facilitators, we're always called in because something needs transforming. And there will be no transformation without someone to lead it. So even if we are leading the process, that means we are stepping into a leadership role to get people from A to Z, however it is that happens. So in the course, we have a number of modules. Purpose, first and foremost, your own purpose as a facilitator, as a leader in that position, as well as understanding your client's true purpose. So we talked a little bit about clients and their motivations today. So how do we make sure that we dig into the true purpose of the session so that we can achieve the means that go beyond the stated purpose? The next session is
presence.
Yes.
And how are we present with ourselves so that we can actually hold the space for the group? Who are we as facilitators when we show up? And what impact do we have by our pure presence? As soon as we enter the space, we usually deal with teams. There's a sort of disruption. So how is the interplay between us and the group, which then leads us directly into the process, the people model?
People, yes, we jump to people. Because before we go into what we're doing, we need to decide or look at who we're doing this with. So we have the people module where we really go into who's in front of us, both as individuals and as a group. Who shows up? Who are these participants? What is the group dynamics, right? That can show up within different groups, and also how to do interventions, either on a specific participant or on the group as a whole. Which
So
then
thinking about
then it goes into we move it into process. Exactly.
Process. Flor and I co-facilitate the process module, which is all about how do we design once we get all these people in the room with a stated purpose. So, long story short, looking at the time.
Very good. Good point.
And then comes the hairy bit about power and power dynamics. We talked a little bit about the clients. There's a power dynamic with different hierarchies in the room as a facilitator with a group. So we'll unpack that. And then we finish with lots of play and some practice. And the practice also includes co-facilitation, so that we actually know what we are getting ourselves into with the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we hope to see you there. There's a 15% discount until the 15th of April, if I'm not mistaken. So sign up fast. Join us for May 8th and be part of this beautiful learning journey.
Yes, we look forward to seeing you there.
Very much. And thank you both, my fabulous co-facilitators.
Absolutely. And thanks for everybody joining us today and all the wonderful comments.
Yeah.
It's been a big pleasure.
The comments are so rich. Definitely a good place to dig into. Bye for now.
Bye.